Nickel is one of those materials that have few uses by themselves, but are integral to a single process with a single companion material that makes it absolutely essential to every single economic sector. Standard steel bends and rusts and corrodes and warps and loses some of its coherence with high or low temperatures. But add about 3.5% nickel and a splash of chromium to the steel mix, and you get an alloy that is both stronger and largely eliminates those concerns. We colloquially know this product as stainless, the backbone of nearly all steel used in every single application. The forging of such stainless accounts for more than 2/3 of total global nickel demand. Other nickel metal alloys account for another fifth. 1/10 goes into electroplating, with the balance going into batteries. As one might expect, China is the world's largest importer, refiner, and user of nickel ore. But the ubiquitous nature of steel in pretty much everything, everywhere, means that even China's large-scale, breakneck industrialization and urbanization cannot dominate the entire market. Unlike aluminum, where much of the resulting finished metal is exported, the bulk of the nickel ore the Chinese refine and blend into steel is used at home. So whereas China's impact on the aluminum market is an all-caps issue that has destroyed the capacity of competitors the globe over, China's nickel-related steel habits are merely highly distortionary. Nickel is one of those rare materials where the implosion of global trade will not automatically result in the implosion of the market. 4 of the top 5 producers, Indonesia, the Philippines, Canada, and Australia, are ones that have alternative markets for their nickel sales in their own neighborhoods. The last of the top 5, the French territory of New Caledonia, is highly likely to see its output plunge as internal debates over whether it wants to be a failed colony or a failed country override all other thinking. The number 6 slot goes to Russia, which produces nearly all its nickel from a single complex near that god-awful city of Norilsk. Add in Russia's building geopolitical, financial, demographic, and transport complications, and I'd not count on Norilsk being a major source of global metals supplies a couple of decades from now. Add it all up, and the nickel market might actually achieve something that much of the soon-to-be world will become eminently unfamiliar with: balance. I'm not going to bother with the more blasé uses for silicon. The silicon that goes into glass is typically sourced from normal sand. Purification is required, obviously, but we cracked the code for that process nearly 2 millennia before Rome. And in modern times, it doesn't require a particularly sophisticated industrial base to churn out glass at volume. Nor am I going to look at the other big use for sand, part of the input process for unconventional oil production, aka fracking. After a few years, the oil services firms discovered that nearly any basic sand will work just fine. No, we're going to instead focus on the silicon products that are much higher up the value-added scale and more integral to day-to-day life in the modern world. Silicon is wildly common, accounting for something like 1/4 of the Earth's crust. We think of silicon most commonly as sand because we immediately and emotionally attach sand to beaches and lakes. But in reality, most of the world's silicon is locked up in quartz and silica rocks. Such rocks are far better than beach sand because they aren't contaminated with algae, plastics, hypodermic needles, or pee. If you're making glass, 98% purity is A-OK. But the absolute lowest grade for silicon as an actual industrial input is 99.95% pure. Getting there requires a blast furnace, which typically requires a lot of coal. Overall, the process isn't all that complicated. You basically just bake the quartz until anything that is not silicon burns away, which means some 90% of this first step processing tends to be done in countries like Russia and China, countries with a lot of surplus industrial capacity that don't give two shits about environmental issues. This quality level is more than fine for most of what we use silicon for. Roughly 1/3 of production ends up in things we know as silicones, a broad category that includes everything from sealants to kitchen utensils to gaskets to coatings to fake boobs. And silicates, which go into ceramics, cement, and glass. Nearly half is alloyed with aluminum to make the creatively named silumins. which have largely replaced steel in any product where shedding a lot of weight is more important than being able to take a tank shell, most notably in train and automobile frames. There is no improving vehicle mileage without a lot of aluminum and silicon. No electronic vehicles either. Greens take note. Smelting aluminum is power intensive. Forging silicon is power intensive. Alloying them is power intensive. The frame for an EV requires roughly quintuple the energy input of a traditional car. That's one of a score of inconveniently non-environmentally friendly details Tesla leaves out of its advertising. Such products are both important and omnipresent, but they aren't the sexy part of the story. That comes from the final two product categories. First up are solar panels. The 99.95% purity of standard silicon isn't anywhere near enough. A second round in the blast furnace gets silicon up to 99.99999% pure. That's 7 nines. Round 2 is far more sophisticated than round 1's bake it pure. China's GCL group is the only Chinese entity that can manage such precision at scale, making it responsible for 1/3 of global supply. The rest comes from a smattering of developed world companies. This pure silicon is incorporated into the solar cells that make solar panels do their thing, with the assembly work more often than not done in China. Second are the semiconductors, with silicon being by far the biggest input by volume. And since some of the newer semiconductors are shaped at nearly the atomic level, the silicon must be 99.9999999% pure. That's 10 nines. No way that gets done in China. Once some first world company makes this ultra-rarefied electronic-grade silicon, it is sent on to somewhere in the East Asian rim to be melted into a cleanroom vat and grown into the crystals that form the foundation of all semiconductor manufacture. In a post-globalized world, all this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, with most stuff cycling through China at least twice, will be a solid no bueno. Expect the Chinese and Russians to get largely cut out of global processing simply due to issues of security and supply chain simplicity. Anything shy of solar and electronics applications should be more or less okay. The base work isn't technically challenging. That's where the good news ends. Figure half the population of the planet can kiss the very idea of solar panels goodbye. The problem isn't the quartz. We already produce solar quality quartzes in Australia, Belgium, Canada, Chile, China, France, Germany, Greece, India, Mauritius, Norway, Russia, Thailand, Turkey, and the United States. The problem is the purification. It is only done in China, Japan, the United States, Germany, and Italy. But the real problem will be the semiconductors. Some 80% of the world's high-quality quartz that ultimately makes up electronic-grade silicon comes from a single mine in North freaking Carolina. Want to remain modern? You pretty much must get along well with the Americans. They will soon have something they have never had: resource control over the base material of the digital age. They're also going to do pretty well dominating the overall high-end semiconductor space. Uranium is a bit non-standard, because until recently, a leading source of uranium demand went to efforts to blow up the planet with the push of a button. Humanity certainly still has problems, and with the end of the order, it will have many, many, many more. But at least no one is stockpiling tens of thousands of strategic atomic warheads. The reality is even better than it sounds. Starting in 1993, the Americans and Russians started not only separating their warheads from their delivery systems, but also removing the uranium cores from those warheads and spinning them down into the sort of material that can be transformed into fuel for nuclear power plants. By the time this megatons to megawatts program was completed in 2013, the two countries had transformed some 20,000 warheads, leaving each side with only about 6,000 apiece. Great for global peace? Certainly. But the effort skewed the uranium market. The Americans and Russians used this warheads-turned-fuel program to power their civilian nuclear reactors. In the United States, such spun-down weapons material powered 10% of the grid for nearly 2 decades. And since large portions of nuclear power fuel are recyclable, the uranium market will remain distorted for decades to come. If you're not American or Russian, your only source of nuclear power fuel is to source uranium ore, grind it into a powder called yellowcake, heat it to a gaseous state to separate the uranium from the waste ore, and spin that uranium gas through a series of centrifuges so the different isotopes of uranium at least partially separate. Split them up partially, and you get a civilian-grade mix of uranium that is roughly 3 to 5% fissile material, which can be processed into power reactor fuel rods. Spin them up to the 90% fissile level for a warhead, and the US government is likely to throw you a surprise party, complete with some high-caffeinated Special Forces troops and a few thoughtfully live precision-guided munitions. In a post-order world, uranium is likely to become more popular as a power fuel. While running a 1 gigawatt coal power plant for a year requires 3.2 million metric tons of coal, a 1 gigawatt nuclear power plant requires only 25 metric tons of power fuel enriched uranium metal, making uranium the only electricity input that could theoretically be flown to its end user. There's also unlikely to be all that crazy a shakeup to the world's civilian nuclear fleet, or at least not one due to access restrictions. The world's top 4 nuclear power generating countries are the United States, Japan, France, and China. Japan and France both have the capacity to go out and source their needs without assistance. China's uranium comes from neighbors Kazakhstan and Russia. The locations that face the most risk in sourcing sufficient supplies will be those middle powers that both lack the military capacity to source their own inputs and live in geographic locations that utterly preclude safe shipments. Switzerland, Sweden, Taiwan, Finland, Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Ukraine, and Korea. The likelihood of insufficient supplies increases as you move through the list. Lowly zinc has been with us for a long time. Zinc ore is often found commingled with copper, and smelting them together generates brass. We've been making that stuff on purpose for at least 4,000 years, although it wasn't until the most recent millennium that we truly understood the physical chemistry of it all. Copper and zinc ions can replace one another in the crystal lattice of metal alloys. What's unique about zinc isn't that it will not corrode, it corrodes very easily, but instead how it corrodes. The outer layer of a zinc object oxidizes quickly, forming a patina that prevents oxygen from penetrating any deeper. Voila! Corrosion generates protection. In some applications, the zinc only needs to be present rather than actually bonded to the entirety of the metal object. Bolt or wire a disk of zinc onto a ship's rudder or buried propane tank, for example, and the zinc will corrode away to nothing while protecting the tank or rudder. Fast forward to the electrical and chemical understandings of the industrial age, and we've upgraded our use of zinc into a wide range of products. The same electrical characteristics that protect the aforementioned propane tank make zinc a preferred component in alkaline batteries. We still use a lot of zinc-heavy brass, as it is easier to work and stronger than copper, while maintaining zinc's magical corrosion management characteristics. It's useful in everything from cellular towers to plumbing to trombones. Zinc isn't only fuss-free in merging with copper, making it a perennial favorite in products that are cold rolled into sheets or die-cast. We also like to coat it on steel and other industrial metals. Once we decided we wanted as little to do with lead as possible, zinc stepped in as a safe, reliable substitute. The biggest use, where we put roughly half our zinc, is in galvanization processes, where we add that zinc patina. It's a step that is particularly effective in shielding metals from the corrosive effects of weather and seawater. Such uses are in pretty much all the metal you can see every day. Car bodies, bridges, guardrails, chain link fencing, metal roofs, and so on. Altogether, zinc is our fourth favorite metal by use, behind only steel, copper, and aluminum. It will stay in that spot in the decades to come. Zinc is eminently recyclable. Roughly 30% of zinc production is from recycled material, with roughly 80% of all zinc capable of making a second go of it. It's found on its own, as well as with lead in many places around the world. China is the largest producer because, of course, it is, but almost all Chinese zinc is for its own end consumption. Peru, Australia, India, the United States, and Mexico round up the top 6. The result is a supply system that is broadly sourced and broadly diversified, offering zinc at a lower price point than better-known metals such as copper. In a world of broken supply systems, at least we'll still have zinc.